Good morning, everyone, and thank you for investing your time and joining this session. Again, my name is Ghasemi. I'm the founder and chief analyst of Ghasemi Research. I'm also the moderator for this panel session. So today's panel discussion is about cross-border. And the main topic is that how can you evaluate the readiness of your organization and support infrastructure prior to developing a go-to-market strategy. So cross-border, as you know, is the key to experiential growth for many, many retailers. However, brands selling into international markets will have to take many steps to provide a successful experience to their shoppers, from calculating tax duties for each region to logistic technologies, payment methods, and multiple currencies, and much more. It's a complex undertaking, and one that, if provided at less than the highest capability, will decrease brand loyalty and conversion. So in this keynote panel, we will highlight the benefit of cross-border e-commerce and outline the steps you should take to capture your share of the international market. During the next 40 minutes, you will hear from our experts in online, as well as brick and mortar retailers, how you can leverage the power of cross-border e-commerce in your business. We are also going to explore the critical factor as well as the importance of customer experience in your target market. So here is the format to give you an idea of what to expect. First, we are going to discuss on how to identify, study, and reach new demographics in new target market, how to create a go-to-market strategy for different countries. Then we will discuss rollout strategy and outsourcing. And of course, the last part is about customer experience and engagement in new territory. So let's get right into it by introducing our panelists. In our panel today, we have Ben Hare. He's a director and chief operating officer of Tinyme. We have Rachel Tiggle, GM of Digital and Customer Experience, 3x1. And last but not least, Christian McKelvie, Head of Marketplace, catch.com.au. Hello, everyone is here? Hi, Rachel.
Hey, Mike.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Good to see you guys. Good to see you, Christian. And hey, Ben.
G'day, how you doing?
I'll give you a minute. Rachel, would you like to introduce a bit about yourself, your business, and then pass it to Christian and, of course, to Ben? Oh, you will have a minute.
All right, let's see if I can do it in a minute now. It'll be fine. So now my name's Rachel Tiggle. I'm the General Manager of Digital and Customer Experience at 3x1. Now, you may not have heard of 3x1, but we're actually one of the world's leading denim houses. We own brands A-Brand, Rollers, and New, and we specialize in premium denim and apparel. We currently have a global business. So we have a fantastic business that is currently working on its full direct-to-consumer strategy. It has had extreme success in the wholesale market and is now moving into the direct-to-consumer space and has had a lot of success over the last 12 months. I personally have actually taken 3 businesses cross-border successfully in my career, and I've learned a lot of lessons. So I'm really excited to be able to share some of those with you today.
Thank you, Rachel. So you are an expert in cross-border. I would definitely have a side talk with you. Christian, tell us about yourself, your business.
Thanks, Mike. So my name's Christian. I'm the head of marketplace for catch.com.au. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Catch is one of Australia's largest general marketplaces. We got into the marketplace space around 2 years ago. Prior to that, we were a pure play online retailer. So my day-to-day there is looking after the operational strategic component of the marketplace. So where I sit in with this panel is I spend a lot of my day-to-day working with a lot of international sellers who wish to sell into Australia and helping them sell on our marketplace into Australia successfully.
Great, thank you. Ben, you are next.
Yeah, I'm Ben Hare. I'm one of the 3 directors of Tinyme. So I'm also Chief Operating Officer. Tinyme, for those who don't know, we're in personalized children's products. So we do things like name puzzles and bags and stationery and name labels, all that kind of stuff. Everything we do is made to order. So we make it in Melbourne, we ship globally from there. We've been going for about 15 years in e-commerce, but we launched our first offshore website into the UK about 10 years ago. We've now got 10 different country websites. So we've been doing a bit of cross-border for a while now. And yeah, that's probably enough about me.
Great, thank you, Ben. So let's start with the first question, and I'm going to start with Rachel. And so the question is, and feel free, Christian and Ben, if you want to jump in and continue from what Rachel is sharing with us. The first question is about, there's a lot to consider when thinking about expanding your business across borders. And Rachel, you know that very well. And what will it take to go cross-border? You can share a bit about what kind of resources a company or retailer needs to have to go cross-border.
Sure. So I'm a big believer in cross-border, that it doesn't just happen. You don't just one day put it on your roadmap and say, hey, we're going to go into, let's say we're Australia, I'm going to go into the USA today. There's actually a lot that you need to consider. There's actually, I've been working with this a lot in businesses, kind of 16 points you need to consider, and I'm not going to go over all of them. But the biggest thing is, do you have a plan before you go into cross-border from a financial perspective? This is really important because there are a lot of costs when going into international businesses, and they have to be taken into consideration. Now, we don't just decide to go into an international business. You know, there's a lot of data that tells us that this is an opportunity for us. Perhaps we already have a vehicle that has given us exposure within that market, whether it be marketplace, concession, or perhaps a celebrity influencer that has suddenly skyrocketed our business within a certain country. So, you know, it's first identifying what the opportunity is, and then basically the cost of that opportunity. So I like to think of cross-border opportunities as basically like its own startup within a business. And I think that actually makes it really exciting. So when you think about it as a startup, if you were starting a new business, you wouldn't do that without aligning the rest of the business and making sure that you had the right inputs.
Yeah.
So the biggest thing when you go...
Just bear with me for 1 sec, please.
Sorry.
Some audience input.
Okay. Sorry, Rachel.
Oh, good. I'm happy to take questions from the audience. So the biggest thing is to have a business aligned before you go into any international market, because in a lot of cases, going cross-border can be a loss leader. And I think that's something that businesses need to go into with their eyes open and understand that, you know, unless there is some significant event like a celebrity and, you know, you can sell out within the first 6 months, there is going to be that kind of, you know, break-even point and your payback period that you have to be really aligned and, I guess, comfortable with as a business. Because if you're not, then that kind of, you'll hinder your success before you've even had a chance to get there. And I think people need to take a long-term view when we're looking at cross-border, and it is in most cases at a minimum about a significant 3-year investment. However, if you get it right, the opportunity is endless, but there are a lot of things to consider, like how do you create your perfect, third-party logistics? How do you make sure that that doesn't blow out your bottom line? How do you look at things like digital marketing investment, taxes and duties? How do you repatriate your cash once you've got it? There's a lot of things to consider. However, they can all be overcome with the right plan. And so for me, if you think about it like its own business, you really can't go wrong.
Got you. That was great. So Ben, I remember you also mentioned that even, you know, choosing something as simple as the website, you know, whether you should go on a local website or, you know, having a global name for your, or domain for your website. Maybe you can also share a bit about your experience. How do you guys go global? How do you guys go cross-border?
Yeah, I mean, that's a specific question that you need to sort of deal with if you're going cross-border. Like, are you going to do it with sort of one sort of global.com site, or are you going to have individual country sites? We've gone down the route of individual country sites, and there's a whole range of sort of things that go into that decision, where SEO is a big one. You know, how's that going to be treated by sort of search engines, but also just the whole sort of impression from the customers. But then there's the whole management of, you know, if you're operating sort of 10 different sites versus one site, that kind of thing. You know, there's pros and cons of both methods, and everyone would need to consider that in their own context. I think definitely that's one thing that you certainly need to sort of think about. But just to emphasize one of the points that Rachel made, I think seeing it as a startup is a really important kind of mindset, because to go cross-border, you have to put up you've got to put together all the facets of your business again, in a way. You've got to put together the logistics, you've got to put together the payments, you've got to think about compliance, you've got to think about websites, customer service, the whole sort of shebang that you'd be thinking about sort of has to get kind of redone. Now, you might hit the ground running, you might have existing product range and brand and all that kind of stuff, but really you're sort of starting afresh, and you're starting afresh with customer acquisition as well. And you need to be thinking like a scrappy startup in terms of how do you get that sort of beachhead in the new markets, and that's a really important sort of piece of the whole thing. The only other thing I'd say is, for people who are considering about going offshore, is you need to make sure that you've got enough margin to play with. So if you're going offshore, you're suddenly dealing with different currencies. You've got different expenses that can sort of hit you. I mean, for us, we're made to order, so we're actually shipping from Melbourne to the world. So we've got to make sure the logistics works. And so you need to make sure that the products that you're offering, you've got enough margin to go with the swings and roundabouts that will come with being offshore. You can see over the course of time, 20-30% move in the currency within not that long, and you need to make sure that your business is actually going to be able to sustain that. And suddenly you don't want to find that your strategy is now defunct because something's changed.
Sure, and I totally agree. I mean, something as simple as the payment processing partner could take quite a while, and I experience it. And sometimes it gets really frustrating, because then you have to see which option is the best in terms of the cost to the customer as well as for the business. So it's not an easy decision, even for something like a payment. Okay, so the question for Christian: how do you select the target market, identify customer persona, and how do you reach out to them?
Great question, and there's a lot to really unpack with that one. I think it depends on the different stages you're at with entering the market. So initially, there's plenty of opportunities you can look at for research and understanding, and starting to build a segment that you want to approach with your brand. Governmental sites, competitor research, just to name a couple of examples. But I think the next piece is really then data capture. Whether you're using a CRM, data analysis platform, using that to then start understanding your customer and then further refine that segmentation. I think a challenge we often see with retailers and brands that come on selling into Australia on our marketplace and we've worked with is that whole kind of set and forget. So they might identify that persona at the first stage, start working towards it, but then they don't continue to optimize. They're not reviewing, they're not listening, they're not responding to their customer, and further developing that persona and then adjusting their proposition to meet that. In terms of reaching out to them, that's quite a broad one. There's the traditional formats in terms of social ads, EDMs, etc. But again, I think the upside to using those now is the data you get back to be able to hone that messaging as you get better over time and learn more.
Well, I mean, that's quite interesting. So Rachel, before obviously having this panel discussion, I check on your website. And that was true. I never heard about your brand before. Given the fact that I would not be the right customer persona for you by the age, how do you choose your customer persona? How do you reach out to them?
Look, Mike, you'd be surprised. We actually do have a brand that would be perfect for you. So just contact me after this, and I'll set you up with some jeans. We ship globally, so don't worry. So just when we're looking at how do we identify and reach out to them, I think this is a really hard question, because this is, I think, where people tend to blow out their budgets when we're talking about cross-border acquisition, because it is really expensive to just go after everyone, right? And unless we are markets or we are brands that have a lot of money to play with, and we can do that really big stretch into that market, a lot of brands can't afford to do this. So when we're looking at who do we reach out to, we look at our existing data pools. So your Google Analytics, where does it show you that you've got this huge opportunity? That tends to be the first thing. However, in businesses that are growing very quickly, there may be exposure that hasn't been capitalized on with a digital footprint yet either. So for example, there may be a concession strategy or a marketplace strategy, and there's existing customer recognition within the market that isn't being capitalized on. And that has been my experience. It's either a vehicle like a celebrity, or there's a resi physical or digital infrastructure that isn't being capitalized on. So to really identify that right persona and reach out to them, you can kind of look at it at top of funnel prospecting. So essentially either buying, a third-party database or reaching out through, programmatic buying, but that stuff's all really expensive. If you can kind of partner with doing a marketplace strategy or concession strategy and bringing those things together, you will get physical recognition, and then you can capitalize on sort of your mid-funnel, which is much cheaper. So things like brand names, products within Google itself, so Google paid marketing, and becomes much cheaper, and you start to get this recognition building where you start to see the money coming in, but you're actually not paying that much more for it in terms of your digital marketing expense. So that's a really big one. The other thing to do is to really take your data pool where you've got your biggest market. So let's say, for example, it's in Australia, and start to do lookalike audiences. In my career, that's been extremely successful because you already have a huge data pool that you can capitalize on that can be utilized globally in things like paid social. And then you can also do things that are more, I guess, brand-led and acquisition-based, like partnering with your payment gateways. Things like Afterpay have a huge global database that you can access, partnering with brands that are really big in the space that align with your brand values. Those things are all really easy, and build up an acquisition pool for you to then grow that lookalike audience and start to economize your spend as you grow in that international market. Unless you're doing those things, your cost will always be exponential until you can bring it down by fostering your own data. So the way that I look at it is, if you can do the right things when you first launch into a market and make sure that you're getting, enough exposure, enough acquisition, enough awareness, you can use that lifetime value you start to build to bring your costs down over time.
Absolutely, and it was a very good lesson I learned just now, that by partnering with other, players like Afterpay, you can actually reach out to a much bigger, the customer base, and that makes your life easier. So Ben, given the fact that you sell to different markets, and obviously when you sell into the different market, there is a payment that it needs to be, arranged by the customer. Talking about frictionless payment checkout, how do you provide an experience that hyper-localized with familiar payment option, competitive pricing is available to your customers?
Yeah, cool. Maybe just quickly before I go into the payment side of things, just one other comment on the target market selection for people to be really aware of is just be aware of what your competitive position is going to be in those markets. It's a bit like the whole startup sort of mentality is really important, but it's very easy for people to get starry-eyed about, the US is a massive market, or I'm going to go there. But if you're selecting your market, you've got to know where you fit in that, because the US is a very, very competitive landscape. And to be honest, the different states are all very different as well. So pick your market. Well, we've actually seen better success in some small markets than the US than we have there. Like UK is actually our biggest market. We've seen good results in Singapore, New Zealand, some of those sorts of markets. So just think about, but a big part of that is who else are you competing with in those markets, and what does it look like? Moving on to the payments sort of side of things, it's really important to understand what the landscape looks like in the markets that you're targeting, because the payment landscape does vary quite a lot depending on what country you're in. So, in Australia, in e-commerce, we have a very credit card dominant kind of sort of payment methodology, combined with, your buy now, pay laters and those kinds of things. But ultimately, at the heart of a lot of that is credit cards. That's not necessarily the case in a lot of different markets. So you definitely need to be thinking about that. I wouldn't call myself a world expert in that. There's a lot of reports that basically go through the different markets and what is the breakdown of different payment methods that people tend to use when shopping online. But you need to be thinking about how you actually sort of access those payments. A lot of the major sort of payment providers are able to provide you with access to different payments, but you need to make sure that you're actually offering them. Like if you're going into Asia, you need to be thinking about, some of the markets, you need to be thinking about Alipay and WeChat Pay and China Union Pay and those sorts of things. So there's some of the markets in Europe actually have quite a lot of sort of what we'd call EFT or direct bank transfer kind of payments. So be, do the research in terms of if you're targeting a particular market, what does the payment landscape look like? Because that's one place you can see a certain amount of cart abandonment if you're not offering the right sort of options. And as part of being sort of that localized experience, and I think having a localized experience is really important. You need to have you need to demonstrate to your customers, you're trying to build a trust that you're actually servicing that market deliberately. And so however you go about that, but that mentality is really important. So whether it's in how you portray the content on your website, whether it's looking at sort of events and calendar sort of things that happen in that market. Like for us, Mother's Day is different in different markets. So if you go and sort of send out an Australian Mother's Day into a market where it's not Mother's Day, you look like an idiot, frankly. So, you look like you're not servicing that market particularly well. So you need to make sure you're doing your research about what are the things that are going to affect locally in those markets and tailor your approach.
Before asking the next question, a quick survey to all our panelists. So what percentage is the cost of transaction fee in your business? In my case, it's about between 6 to 8%, and it's not very good. So maybe you can share or answer this quick question before we jump to the next question.
Too much.
Rachel, is it the same?
It's too much. That's what it is.
Yeah,
too much. Pandemic has made this very difficult. So yes, it's too much.
Yeah. Christian, what's yours?
I'll defer to too much as well. It's a very challenging landscape, but it's and it becomes even more and more critical. But yeah, defer in there. It's always too much.
And Ben, is it too much?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's always too much. But I think it varies by market though. Like if you're looking at, you're talking about particularly the payment sort of transaction costs.
Yes, I'm talking about that because in Australia, one thing we can't get rid of is that 35 cents that we have to pay for every transaction, regardless of the transaction value. Yeah,
so it varies a lot by market as well. So just say on credit cards alone, the interchange fees are totally different in different markets. So like Australia's actually got quite low interchange fees compared to even say the UK is quite a bit higher, and some are way higher. So it really varies a lot, and it varies a lot whether you've got if you're using a cross-border payment service, you'll be paying a global interchange fee, which is a lot more. Like if you can set up, like for UK and US, we've actually set up local entities and we've got local bank accounts. If we do that, we've got a local sort of merchant fee, and that's much lower. But then the markets where we don't have that set up, we're paying that global interchange fee, so it's way more expensive. So there's definitely ways you can try and get down.
Yeah, I would love to have another discussion on the cross-border payment, because that's a completely different topic. But there are so many questions around that subject. So Christian, I want to ask you the next question is about partnering with the third-party logistics service providers. How to deliver internationally and set up a local return policy, given the fact that lately Australia is becoming very, very known in the global market for being very slow as far as the delivery is concerned. I hope we don't have anyone from Australian Post in this event. I myself, I experienced a 2 months delay for a t-shirt that I ordered way before my birthday, and they only delivered it 5 days after my birthday. So it was a very big disappointment. So how do you address this? How do you find the right third-party logistics service provider?
Well, that's the hot question, right? Particularly as you said right now during COVID. I mean, if there's one kind of consistent truth globally is that people want their packages free, fast, and safely. So I'd say, look, again, on a common trend throughout this panel already, which is on the research and identifying there. But I'd say it's for myself, it's more about like, well, what is that correct third-party carrier? So I'd say there's the first one I think most retailers and most brands will jump to is on cost, right? And reliability, but there's other considerations. Customer perceptions in the market, delivery experience and quality based off regional areas. One that we're constantly working with international sellers into this market, and as I think a lot of Australian retailers would know, is how challenging it gets to when we get to regional areas here, and having to spell that out. And that's similar with other markets around the globe, is that one carrier that might be exceptional in, say, metro or city-based areas might be notoriously or challenging for regional areas, and that can then hurt the customer segment there. I'd say tracking is becoming a much more of a prevalent one as well, and particularly in that last mile. Customers are really focused on now wanting that clear communication, wanting to know where they're packaging at any point and what to do if something does go wrong. And I think considering that in any carrier you're looking at globally is key. I'd say returns policy is becoming more and more pressing as well, particularly in light of COVID. It's often that stumbling block a lot of retailers we find just don't consider. Obviously, all the thought is on how do we get the packages to customers across the border as quickly and safely as possible. But what happens when it goes wrong, and how do we get it back? And it's that missing gap. No one likes to talk about returns, I think, in general, because it's that it usually is the one that impacts the bottom line. It's a cost to the retailer, but it's so key, particularly in this day and age. So thinking about what providers can assist with that. What's your process and policy for dealing with returns, particularly across border? Will you potentially look at the cost of just getting evidence from the customer and writing it off and accepting as is, or do you want to get it back? Or if you get it back, do you get it to a local partner? Do you partner with someone there that can help facilitate, whether it's doing repairs, etc.? But it's such a key piece in this day and age, particularly in that last piece if you do get it back. How long is it going to take for your current operations to process that package and get back to the customer? Because again, as we get more visibility and as we approach that with customers can see this, and there's a timer on it, and it can damage that customer experience, which is paramount to all.
Great, thank you. So Rachel, same question. You sell in the international market. How is your local return policy, given the fact that you're selling clothing, and it's one of the items that usually you get a lot of return due to the size or the color or any other reason?
Yeah, so look, returns within a fashion apparel is kind of one of the biggest topics that we get. You know, within other industries, returns kind of take a little bit of a backseat, but with fashion apparel, especially denim, there is a really high propensity for returns, just because it's such a subjective choice when it comes to your denim, especially your bottom half, as we have quite a big female audience as well. So this comes up quite a bit, and it is something that I have spent quite a bit of time in my career looking at, because it does affect fashion so heavily. And local policies are actually quite dangerous. So when we look at shipping, there's sort of two options, and I know we're going to come to this later in the chat, but there's obviously infrastructure and third-party logistics within the area in which you're trying to dominate, and that's obviously the first thing that people go to. But there are now so many more providers that allow you to actually potentially ship from your own local warehouses with, you know, reduced ship times, reduced costs, that actually, when you weigh them up, can actually be beneficial in both ways. So I've actually done both in my career, and both have been extremely successful. For example, at the moment, we're using Seiko from our Australian warehouse to service the US, and it's been incredibly successful, and actually hasn't hit our bottom line as hard as we would have, you know, expected to go from a local market. Where it does limit to us is that, you know, marketplaces become more difficult and shared stock pools, which is obviously a way to economize your stock in a new market. So there is, you know, there's pros and cons to everything. But I think the biggest thing that comes up is returns, and how do you localize that? And for me, it's always been a really hard discussion, because it is sort of a fight between business and customer. And that's not something, as, you know, customer-led, you know, leaders that we really want to come and face up against. Because when you do look at best practices, you've got really big business that dominate the market, really offering, you know, free returns, free exchanges, you know, really low cost ways of people getting product back to your warehouse. And then you're taking double clips as it continues to go out and ship to other customers. So it is a really expensive venture. So the way I look at it is you have to find the balance. And for me, you can always basically give the customer more. It is very hard to take it away without really detrimentally seeing your sales drop. So for me, go in with the one that you are comfortable with as a business, but also that you can maintain from a profitability point of view. Otherwise, everything that you work on from the top will fall out the bottom. And that's really hard to maintain in fashion. So that is just my own experience, and it has been successful. And customers, you've got to make them want the product. They're not going to not buy from you because your return policy is slightly different to the best in market. If they want your product, they will get it. What you just need to do is break down any frictional barrier to them getting it back to you. You know, have automated labels, have a automated returns portal, you know, make that cost, you know, cheaper if they were to go walk into a post office and pay, you know, 50 USD to get it back to Australia. All of those things that are friction for customers, if you can make it frictionless, they're more likely to do it. And so you can mitigate a lot of that risk without hitting your bottom line. And the other thing is to aggregate and send back. So don't send each individual item back. So, you know, have a little hub potentially within your international markets. It could even be a store. It could be a concession. Aggregate and send back, because that will save you a lot of money in the long run.
Great. So Ben,
just to pick up on that point.
Please go ahead. In fact, I wanted to ask the same question, but I want you to continue.
Just pick up on that point from Rachel. You can also do that aggregation on the outbound as well. So like for us, we've got quite lightweight, low value products, which makes the shipping quite challenging in many ways. So one model we've done, like say for our UK market, we'll send a consolidated air freight shipment across to our UK office because everything's made to order in Australia, so we have to make it here, or else we have to put in a manufacturing facility, which is a much bigger deal. But so we'll send a consolidated air freight shipment with all the pre-packaged orders and stuff across to our UK office, and then they'll get a local pickup using raw mail to do the local delivery. And so again, that aggregated model means we can get really quite fast because we're getting, we get to UK households in 2 or 3 business days from dispatch here. But you can do it quite cost effectively because you're sharing that kind of the expensive air freight bit where you're shipping it halfway around the world is done on an aggregated model.
I would love to ask more questions when it comes to the logistics and the local return policies, but we have a limited time, so I'm going to move on and I was asking you the next question. How do you scale your operations without having to invest big money in infrastructure? Christian, how do you do that?
I think it comes down to, from personal experience, simplicity and having a plan. Of course, my dog jumps in there, so apologies. He's quite vocal on it. But I think, like for us in our experience, as we're looking now, for context, our business was acquired by Wes Farmers about 2 years ago. And through that, there's been a big transformation piece to really facilitate scale. And our approach has really been those 2 things. What are the simple things we need to look at now, breaking that into easily achievable objectives, and then working towards a long-term vision. I think too often than not, what blows out cost, particularly in looking cross-border or big projects, is getting caught up in the grand sense of scale. Planning too big, planning too large, not having a consistent vision for teams to align to, and then that in turn blows that cost off, means you don't meet that objective. For us, I think in addition, again, data is really key. Documentation, making sure that where we can, we're capturing data, we're reviewing that, making small tweaks, continually making things more efficient and optimized as we learn and get better. And that documentation, again, there's so many processes in time. I think we're so quick to push out processes. We're not there to document them, and again, we lose knowledge, and then we lose time through that, and that in turn becomes a cost loss as well.
Sure. And Ben, how do you scale your business without investing big money in infrastructure?
Well, it's one of the beauties of e-commerce is going cross-border, I think, is much easier than in many other industries. So, you can try things out and you can test it on fairly low budgets and low spend on infrastructure and that kind of thing. If you're putting a 3PL in market or that kind of stuff, you have an inventory store and there's certain investment you have to make. But you can actually turn on, if you use a global shipping option, you can actually try out different markets and see what kind of sort of appetite you get within those markets before you kind of commit to them. We certainly did that part of our target market selection. Like we'll ship globally off our Australian site. We've done that for years. And so when we're picking which markets we're going to put a dedicated country site in, we look at, well, where have we got some customers? We have some markets where we had customers where we'd never marketed there, and yet somehow they'd found us. And those were some of the markets we tried out first to see what the uptake would be if we gave them a more localized, dedicated sort of website option and that kind of stuff. And that has been quite a good way of sort of testing and seeing how we do that. I think the main thing is you have to be fairly nimble, and you've got to be willing to test and try stuff. And so really thinking about how you stage your strategy of entering markets is quite important, because if you sort of go all in and commit too early with big spend in different markets, you could come a cropper, because you might just find you just don't get the same, you just don't always, not all markets sort of pan out the same. You might have had success in Australia, you might find it success in the UK, you might not find it successful in US, or a different market. You sort of need to just sort of stage your approach and work out where you're seeing success and really sort of double down on those markets and that spend and that customer experience too. Like if you're seeing good traction in certain markets, invest in the customer experience, turn it into a real kind of solid business in itself. And for us, we've also staged that and try not to do too many at once, but sort of really try and sort of establish ourselves in certain markets progressively.
Sure. So before asking you the last question, I have one question from our audience, from Ryan Smith. And feel free if any of you want to jump in and answer the question. When do you pivot from an ad-driven to direct marketing approach in new markets? Rachel, you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, this one I think is a numbers game for me. It's really, I really wouldn't stop doing any ads in markets. It's really how do you use your data to then make them more efficient, as we've talked about. But direct marketing really comes from when your database can start to create its own income stream, and how quickly you can do that is up to you in terms of how much you want to spend for acquisition and how do you get the leads that are most relevant to your business. So, you know, we talked about going through, you know, third-party payment gateways, whether we go through, you know, using a different brand to get your database up, but it's really got to be with when that database can produce its own revenue stream. That means you can supplement the income you're getting from digital ads.
Sure, thanks, Rachel. Go ahead, Ben.
I kind of add on that. In my view, you kind of want to start almost straight away. You kind of want to build a portfolio like you do in any business. You want to have a portfolio of channels that you're using. And some of those approaches that require you to build a list and that kind of stuff, you've got to get the infrastructure in place to build a list. So, you know, start on that straight away. It won't necessarily be your main revenue driver up front. You know, you might, because you don't have a list to start with, but you need to be making sure you're thinking about that, because otherwise you won't ever have the opportunity to transition. And like Rachel said, you don't sort of fully transition, you kind of maintain both and run it as a portfolio. But like definitely when we've entered new markets, we're looking at straight away. How do we build a list? How do we sort of capture customers? How do we have that there that we can then market directly to?
Sure, and I believe that as long as, you know, entering into a new market is concerned, the best approach is what Rachel mentioned earlier, finding a partner who already has a ready database and is willing to partner with you, so that actually would be, you know, a much more efficient approach to get to the customer. So the last question, and I will give about a minute to each panelist to answer this question, starting from Christian. How do you personalize customer experience in cross-border e-commerce, which is super important?
Incredibly. So I think, again, it comes back to data and how you start learning, how do you present that and how you start leveraging that across marketing, site design. I think for us, personalization is a really big focal point for us now, particularly coming from a marketplace space. When we start dealing with millions of potential products, thousands of sellers, there's only so many ways you can cut that, taking a generalist approach across customers, and personalization really is that way forward. And I think it's becoming a bigger expectation. I'd say in cross-border, again, it's really, it's listening to your customer. It's capturing up the data. It's also, again, constant analysis, looking to competitors, looking towards trade body sites, and understanding like how that experience differentiates across different channels, across different segments. And the mistake we often see wrong from retailers, particularly again, coming in and selling in the Australian market, is that whole one-size-fits-all approach. We're really beyond that now. That personalization can be anything from rewording product listings, changing the way product lifestyle images are sent and put on listings. These are all concrete ones. It's all about building a system that means you can adjust those to scale, but you can also learn from them in time.
So Ben, you are in a personalized business. Every single item that you sell is personalized. I give you a minute, go straight into the answering this question.
Well, I think the answer to that is pretty similar to what you do in one market in terms of the personalization. The only aspect that's different going cross-border is the localization element, which is not really personalization itself. And that's, you definitely need to be aware of differences in markets. And sometimes it's, even in markets you think are quite similar, like for us in the US, like we sell personalized drink bottles for kids. So in Australia, our product is called a personalized drink bottle. In the US, they mostly call them water bottles. They don't call them drink bottles. So if you're looking at your search results and that kind of stuff, very different sort of search traffic volumes for that product. You know, and it sounds basically the same product, but you know how we had to rename. We didn't pick that up straight away, and so we had to rename that product for our US website. We call them water bottles rather than drink bottles, And like little nuances like that can make a real difference to it. Now, that's more of a localization piece rather than personalization. I think what you do for personalization generally holds in other markets as well. So not a huge difference with cross-border.
So Rachel, you are the last, but give us the best advice on personalization.
I actually have a really controversial view on this. It's not really controversial, but I tend to disagree a little bit with the other panelists. I think personalization is incredibly important when it comes to the customer journey. However, I actually think personalization and localization when you're in a new market are one and the same, because I think you don't have enough data yet, especially when you've gone into a new market, you don't have enough data yet to really identify that customer and start making really personalized decisions for them. So things that I think localization, but have a personalization kind of, I guess, attribute to them are things like having competitive shipping and returns policies. You know, that's personalized and localized to that market. Having local payment types, like we've talked about, included duties and taxes. I mean, that's not something that we even think about that's particularly sexy, but it's a huge barrier to entry for people. And it does localize in that market and really makes it a personalized shopping experience for them as they're used to in their market. You know, you've got things like content localization, languages and translations. All of these things are really important to the customer. They're quite heavy in cost to business, but actually that's what starts to make up that really unified experience for the customer. And then from there, you start to gain their data, their sales, their transaction history. All of those things start to come together where you can start to do a personalization strategy within that market that is relevant to the customers in which you are acquiring. And that's universal, right? It's the same as it is in any other country, to the point that Ben and Christian made, is that basically you just have to find the time capturing the data, getting the right benefits to promote to the customer, and then basically telling them what they are and making them buy into them. You know, you can't sell a secret like you can in any other market. So once you have that data, your personalization should be a global strategy.
Great. Thank you. So with this, I would like to end this panel discussion. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Rachel, for being in this panel. I really enjoyed. Thanks for sharing your thought, and hope to see you again. Back to you, Sohana.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Thanks, Ben, Christian, and Rachel, once again for a fantastic discussion on cross-border e-commerce. I'm sure a lot of valuable takeaways there for especially brands looking to expand their markets across the regions. So thanks for joining us here today once again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the summit.